a blue button has appeared, which means if I click that, we are actually live. We're only a minute late. That's basically on time. In railway time, we're actually scheduled ahead of time, being a minute late.
I
That's
was going
fine.
to say, yeah, for particularly what we're talking about
I know.
today, that's very early
That's it.
for
You're pleased. You're pleased. You basically don't even notice that the train is late if it's within
only
10 minutes.
only partially frozen to death. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. You should be able to hear me. People in the chat. Hello to all of you. Hello, YouTube. I can see people are saying things which is positive. There's already any guesses what I'm drinking tonight? I am drinking water. I didn't have time to make myself a nice hot drink, so I'm drinking cold water out of the Rail Natter mug. It's fine. People can hear me. Sound excellent. If the sound balance isn't all right, let me know. Everyone in the chat, you know what to do. Oh, so we're doing it. We're here. I'm gonna. In fact, I'll tell you what. Before we introduce Rebecca properly, which we're going to do momentarily. So good stuff. There's a slight connection issue. Any issues your end? No. People are asking if there's a pint of brains on the go. No, I don't have a pint of brains on the go. You remember that? Do you remember for a while the rugby they had they weren't allowed to advertise alcohol, so they had brawn written on their shirt, didn't they? Wasn't it like they had bronze written up because Brains was the main sponsor of the Welsh rugby team?
I
Do you remember that?
I know very little about rugby because I'm a terrible Welsh person, but I do remember them advertising at one point that you weren't allowed to go home and be violent towards your girlfriend if Wales lost in the rugby. There were posters up at one point.
Well, that's very
that.
noble, but like also dark. That was the line that they had to advertise. Crikey,
It's incredible stuff.
Yeah, good grief.
Yeah.
So, no one sees that there's any issues there, and good. I was a little bit nervous about the feed because it just disconnected and reconnected, but everyone seems happy enough. Right, in which case, let's crack on. First of all, it's the first live show of the year, which is nice. That's exciting. And there's this weird tradition where we have started doing. It seems the last 2 years, the first of the episode. In fact, it's the only 2 years I've had the first live episode because it's not been running that long. It always ends up being about Wales, and actually, so far, has been about the South Wales Metro every time as well. So, anyway, themes and tropes appear when you do one of these a week. Good grief, we're nearly at 100 episodes, which is scary. Anyway, I'll stop waffling. Right. Oh, the COVID stats. So, what are we seeing in terms of COVID statistics? For anyone who's not familiar with this, including Rebecca, hello. So what I do is before most episodes is I try and get the latest DFT stats on ridership on public transport, particularly during the pandemic. So this is these trends here are as a percentage of pre-COVID levels. So it's not absolute numbers, it's relative numbers. So, for example, I pick any date, October 2021, you can see that things were about 75% of pre-COVID levels. So the equivalent week before COVID was a thing, there were, the 25% more people traveling by train. That's what this blue line is. And so it's always interesting to look at it. So we're following this trend line, trying to be above 75% of pre-COVID levels before the end of the year. But Omicron arrived and everything went downhill after that. And we reached quite a low level of about 30% ridership just before the new year, which is not ideal, but we were kind of on track for 75%, and we had indeed been sat at 75% or nearly at 75% beforehand. But anyway, not an ideal start or end to last year, in that it dropped off because of another bout, another wave, another variant. And you can see in terms of stats, it's starting to climb again quite quickly, actually. Which is sort of what I'd expect to happen. But I think a lot fewer people travelled over Christmas than have done in the past, which is why the numbers were so much lower. So there we go. That is the COVID numbers. Anyone else has any thoughts, then feel free to chip in. When is... Yes, that's right. Well, it's the news, everyone. And we've got Elon Musk. There's some people chatting in a car. And we have Elon Musk has fixed traffic by burying it in a hole under the ground. This is indeed just a cue of this. I absolutely adore videos of the Boring Company loop because it's so funny. Look at it, it's just traffic. What's even funnier is this video came out on Twitter and it's just two people chatting like it's a taxi, and they're stuck in traffic. And this is supposed to be mass transit. It's a joke. I'm not even going to dwell on it. It's just quite funny. Go find the video on Twitter. It's highly entertaining. Oh. What else is going on? In the news, Carillion. Do you remember Carillion, everyone? Do you remember Carillion? Rebecca, were you writing when Carillion happened? It was 2018, I think? It went
No,
pop.
I wasn't then. No,
Ah.
I was. What was I doing then? I was working for an opera company at that point.
Oh,
But
amazing.
I'm very well aware of Carillion.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the ripples continue to bounce off things. It's so particularly recently, it's emerged that KPMG, one of the big four pure consultancies, sort of big accountancy firms, have admitted that they just literally made up documents. They just made them up, just created fake documents to just sort of justify and prove that Carillion were doing fine. It's just bonkers. The whole thing's bonkers. And indeed, Oh, go on.
I saw a thread by John McDonnell earlier, and it seemed to establish that this was something that happened, that was a known thing that kind of happens amongst these auditing firms. There's a history of this kind of activity. It just really shocked me that it seemed to be sort of like an open secret that these kind of practices go on. And
I mean, we have this weird belief in Britain that Britain isn't, that the UK is not an incredibly corrupt country. There's this bizarre. It was said recently that a lot of people are like, oh, Britain's not a corrupt country. I'm almost kind of dropping into like the Alan Partridge, Sir Keir Starmer there. I'm not going to do a Milo Edwards' impersonation of Sir Keir Starmer. I've been listening to way too much Trash Future, so it's all I have in my head. Anyway, particularly today, I would encourage the Prime Minister. Anyway, no, Carillion. Yes, Britain is corrupt. It's horribly corrupt, and the sooner we admitted this, we might be able to start tackling that corruption, rather than just believing that our kind of corruption is fine. Right? You know, how big corporation corruption is fine. Compared to just, like giving a cop a tenner in other countries where we think corruption is bad. Wake up, everyone. Anyway, so yeah, that's all good fun. We're going to explore that in a couple of episodes' time, actually, which I'm quite pleased about. I'm glad that it came into the news because it's important stuff. Anyway, what else is in the news? Oh yes, of course, this is going to be a running theme of the Rail Natter news going forwards, which is that everything is the integrated rail plan now. Absolutely everything. So I was moaning about the integrated rail plan when it came out in November. It's supposed to be an integration of HS2 and the new line across the Pennines into the existing railway network better. What it ended up becoming was cancelling those things. Which is nice. Oh. So, yes, which was nice of government, wasn't it? So you see, this is a project that was started years ago. It's been in the works for about 10 years, and somehow it's made its way, it's become part of the integrated rail plan. This is part of our integrated rail plan. Is it? What? £161 million that was signed off like 2 or 3 years ago, and a project that's been in the works for 10 years before anyone had even invented the words integrated rail plan together. And we're just going to see more of this. More and more stuff that is nothing to do with this daft plan is going to be called part of the integrated rail plan. This is now the government's buzzword thing, that all the wonderful rail stuff that's going to happen. I don't know, I've drawn so many red lines on this page. Is going to be called the IRP. It's because I'm angry. I'm incredibly angry, and I'm focusing that anger into my pen. Look, see, this is me. I'm unhappy. See, look, that's my unhappy face. Anyway, I'm made very angry by this whole thing. It's just very frustrating. So, what else is in the news? We're going to come back to this, but it's Wales versus HS2. There's a whole discussion. Rebecca and I are going to come and chat. We're going to chat briefly about the political context behind this later on in the episode. But, it's so tiresome. People, this constant battle. HS2 finds its way. Basically, we'll explore this later. Suffice to say, HS2 is being drawn into the battle between Cardiff and Westminster over Wales's rightful need for more devolved power and devolved funding. Like, those two things are necessary and right, and HS2 is getting dragged into that argument incorrectly, and it's very annoying, and it makes lots of people who should be agreeing on sensible things fight each other for no reason. We'll explore a bit of that later, but anyway, suffice to say that was in the news.
The theme of Wales, of Welsh politics, is people who should be agreeing with each other fighting over everything. Yes. Well, it's just It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a bit like a slightly different axes. There's like the progressive axes, and progressive people in progressive politics are always fighting each other. People in the left are always fighting each other. And then there's sort of
left of centre and progressive nationalism that's always fighting itself, and nationalism generally often fighting itself, because you've got some of the, particularly in Scotland, a nationalism debate I know much better than the Welsh nationalism debate, which is one that I've started exploring much more recently. But in Scottish nationalism, you've got right-wing nutters who are nationalists, and then you right the way to like full communists who are nationalists, and so it's even more of a broad spectrum of people fighting each other.
That's so familiar. Yeah, we've got that. We've got our own very new sort of right-wing nationalist party, sort of our answer to Albert, I guess. With a party called Glad, and then we've got Plaid Cymru, which is also kind of a collection of sort of very left-wing people and very centristy people, and also some people who are kind of sort of centre-right, but sort of attached to the independence cause. And it's a weird thing. I'm sure you do ever in Scotland as well, where you have this sort of awkward mixture of people kind of bashed together by the same cause.
Much as I don't like to draw too many parallels, there are a lot of parallels between the SNP and Plaid. The SNP rely on two core sets of vote, which is like urban progressives and rural cowboys. And in my parents live in Mid Wales. They live in Talabont and Ceredigion, and the majority vote is very much the rural cowboy, who that kind of a lot of farmers who are very vigorously plied, and they are not left of centre. Let's put it that way. And I think in Scotland it's the same. When I grew up in the countryside. I grew up in a town in the countryside in Scotland, and the rural vote, the rural vote that wasn't Tory was very much. Well, it was Tory, but it was Tory with a different colour. But it was very much like kind of rural nationalist, and they were, again, not left of centre.
I was going to say, farmers in Wales are usually depending on where they live, they're either conservative or sort of Plaid, but a very specific sort of flavour of Plaid. So, definitely parallels.
Indeed. So that was the news. What we're going to do now is 14 minutes into the episode. It always happens. This always happens. I always drag the news. I always think, we're going to whiz through the news and it takes half an hour. So, here's a nice railway station. In fact, which is your local station, by the way, to your mam? Is it Ystrad Rhondda, or is it one of the other wee ones?
No, Ystrad Rhondda's a bit further down the valley than me. My hometown station is Porth. I think it's probably about like 3-4 stops away from you. But yeah, I know this station.
I like this because it's a nice picture for a variety of reasons. It's got what I perceive as like quite a classic valleys view. I know the valleys reasonably well. I've explored them kind of by bicycle and by train, and often it's like moorland, then a line, then sort of a hill with some trees and field on it, then another fairly obvious line, and then a bunch of houses. And the houses might be like terraces, or they might be sort of much more recent new builds. And occasionally you get something like this, which is a massive road or something cutting through it. And that's pretty much like a lot of the valleys for me. It like feels that's like the vibe.
Yeah, there's also usually a coal tip or 10 sort of dotted around. And if you stand on top of one of them and look down, it basically, when you see the valleys, it's sort of like a bunch of hills and mountains, and then you get like all of the towns sort of like slap bang in the middle of the valley, sort of snaking through like a stream, and then you'll get some houses sort of dotted on the hillside. Then it's quite a vibe, and it's a very specific vibe.
It is a very specific vibe, and it's we'll chat more about this shortly, but I think, well, without further ado, given that we're already quarter of an hour in and I've been waffling dreadfully, I think it's time to start the show. Welcome to tonight's Rail Natter, everyone. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, let us do a few things. First of all, let us move on here and look at some insights into rail travel in the valleys.
Jesus Christ! I don't send these to you.
I know. Well, you've made your bed, now you have to lie in it, and let's bring up our faces. So hello everyone. So Rebecca, here are some complaints of yours while travelling by train, and and I'm so glad that. So we had, we've been following each other for a while. I've followed you on Twitter for quite a while, and you're quite incisive insights on anything you write on. So I was like, well, it'd be great if we can get Rebecca in. And then I kind of raised the idea with you, and you're like, well, I don't know anything about railways. It's like, you do know loads about railways. You're a traveller on the train, which means that you are an expert. It's people who travel by train that know the most about railways, because we have to accommodate. The railways are useless if we don't carry anyone on them. And here is your thesis. Right here, which is I like these. So for the people who are the people who are on audio only, I'm weirdly, despite the fact that you were on this episode, Rebecca, I'm going to read out your tweets, which is
oh no.
My favourite here, which is this train feels like an experiment designed to identify at which precise temperature human beings start to cook.
Do you know what? I remember that one vividly as well. It was coming home from work is when I was still commuting back and forth Cardiff from Porth, and it was like the middle of summer. It was one of those days, because the main experience of being on a Valleys train, as you can probably see from that little picture there, is you tend to be slammed up against other people's bodies for long periods of time. And, you're trying to sort of like edge away from people and get some personal space, but it's just not possible. So it was like the middle of summer. It was a really hot day. I remember like dressed to work because I knew that the commute was going to be a nightmare. And I was sitting there like wringing with sweat, angrily typing into my phone as if it was going to help.
Yeah. Oh, it's catharsis. It's catharsis. So, the contrasting you being cooked alive is it's 1 degree outside. The train's over half an hour late. No update from Arriva Trains Wales at the time. Late for work. Pacing the platform like you've shat yourself to slow the creep of imminent icy death. Hashtag defrost Becca. I like this contrast of basically no matter what the temperature is, you are going to be suffering in it.
That's another key one as well, because you have on the trains, you have these really like old battered heaters. So even when it's freezing cold and you get on the train, typically what happens if you're unfortunate enough to sit, because the heaters are underneath the seats.
Yeah.
And so if you sit in front of the heater, usually they're quite busted, so they're extremely hot. So I remember I always wear like sort of long length Doc Martens, and they've obviously got like these rivets in the boots that are metal, and they'd heat up and sort of burn my legs. So you'd be freezing cold, and then you get on the train, and then your legs would be burning because of the heater. So it was just
It's not an ideal situation. I mean, the thing is, we're going to get into the details of why there are all these problems later on. But I think like the key thing is, you've had that experience. You kind of know that whole journey pretty well. So you travel. You used to commute into. Did you commute into Cardiff Centre? Was that the kind of usual commute?
So at the moment, I'm lucky enough that I don't have to commute that far anymore. So I work for the National Wales now, which is a Welsh news service that has its offices in Newport. And I live in Cardiff Bay, so it's basically just a quick hop on what I think of as quite fancy trains. They're not fancy trains. It's just it's because the train going to Newport is the one that goes over to London, and it's the cross country train. It's cleaner, and it's like the trains don't sound like they're shrieking in pain as they pull off. But I used to commute from Porth in the Rhondda Valley. I worked for a time sort of in centre of Cardiff town. I'd go from like Porth to Cardiff Queen Street, and then I for a bit commuted into Cardiff Bay, so I'd switch at Cardiff Queen Street to get on the Bay train. So all of those little snapshots of my misery come from the time when I was either when I was still commuting or when I'm coming from home in Cardiff to visit home in the Rhondda to visit my mum, because even though by car it's about a half an hour's journey, it's a project to get back and forth. I think that
fundamentally, and the geography of the I probably should have just put in some aerial shots of the of the valleys just to give people an idea of, and this will feed into a bit. I'll tell you what, before we do that, let us move on to let's move to the next chapter so we can identify, kind of make the point of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to start by talking about. I mean, we've already touched on it. Talking about the Rhondda Valleys, particularly, and perhaps more broadly, what the valleys are, why they're an important region, what the challenges are, and why I've said rail, but actually public transport. Why public transport is so critical, and sort of So it's probably worth you kind of exploring a bit about. You get to just wax lyrical about the valleys and why they're awesome, but also why they have serious challenges. These are some of the most, post-industrial areas, as people might guess, but. Blenheim Gwent, which is a few valleys over, is one of the most deprived areas in Europe. These are not well off parts of Britain. These are abandoned parts of Britain, frankly. So, I don't know if you want to explore the valleys a bit.
Yeah. So there are two Rhondda Valleys. So there's Rhondda Valley, which is basically the valleys are very close to Cardiff. They're sort of on the sort of just past the outskirts of what we'd consider the wider Cardiff city region. They are former mining communities, as I'm sure most people know. There's two of them. There's Rhondda Valley. Make sure I get this right. I'm from there. I should know. Right. Rhondda Valley is the Mardi. It goes through sort of a series of small towns. You've got sort of like Tylerstown, you've got Ferndale, and then you've got Mardi, and then where I'm from, which is Porth, is the sort of kind of the bigger end of the valley is Rhondda Valley. So you've got sort of my town is what's known as the gateway to the Rhondda, which is the first town as you come in from towards Cardiff and then it goes up to Treherbert, and the Treherbert line is the one that it's the train line that I use. So again, former mining communities, very much mining part of the identity and the fabric of the area to an extent that I only am sort of realizing more and more as I get older. I was thinking the other day, just sort of like, I can't remember what I was doing. I was walking past somewhere and it just suddenly popped into my head about sort of my nan having like a miner's lamp in the living room by the fireplace for no apparent reason. I think it used to belong to her dad. So yeah, and as you were saying, it's deindustrialized. Obviously, it was a big site of the big 1980s miners' strike. You had the lesbians and gay support the miners. There was sort of not my valley, but sort of nearby. Obviously, it was a big site for that conflict between the Thatcher government at the time and the National Union of Mine Workers. Yep. And since the reprivatization of the coal mining industry, it's gone through some pretty awful sort of neglect. It's, as you were saying, Blenheim Gwent sort of nearby, not quite in the same area, but one of the most deprived areas in Europe. You've got areas like Llwynapia in Rhondda Valley that's also incredibly deprived. There's a lot of unemployment. It's difficult to kind of convey because it's sort of everything feels slightly further away there because there's so many places that have shut. You've got high streets that, the shops have kind of all vacated over the years. There's towns like Tornapandy where I used to go when I was a kid shopping with my mother and stuff. There used to be big bustling town centres that are completely empty now. They're just ghost towns. You'll have like a vape shop and that's about it really. And then you've also got the mining legacy in the area. So obviously, again, mid-90s, coal industry reprivatized. All of this land that used to belong to the National Coal Board gets sold off very hastily by the John Major government. And so you end up with this patchwork of, because we have, I don't know how much to go into, because like the thing with coal miners that produce a lot of waste, and how we tend to deal with our waste is we put them into these big huge heaps on the sides of the mountains, coal tips, Very familiar to anyone who's grown up in South Wales, and particularly in the valleys. You play on them, you don't really think anything of them. But what can happen if there's drainage issues underneath the ground or different factors is that they can collapse. And because of the specific geography or the topography would be the right word, topography of the area, where you've got like all of these like terrace streets crammed into like the valley floor between these hills, which then have the tips on them. If they collapse, they then collapse straight into the towns below. So so
I've put OpenStreetMap up, and some people are moaning that they can't tell what's what, but the whole point is that this is you see this, the narrowness of the establishment. So this is I presume this is Vach and this is Vawr here. These
Vawr is there where you see the word Treorchy, that's Vawr.
And so the Vawr is in, which is for the linguists out there, that's a mutation of Mawr, which means big in Welsh. So you can see the valley, and you can see the density. It's hugely dense. This is one of the things about the valleys, is you have this. On average, the density isn't so much, but if you just look at the areas that are able to be built up, they're incredibly dense area, densely populated, or certainly were. And as a result of that, they're kind of they're becoming feeders for, or they've almost entirely become feeders for Cardiff now. For the major
that's the
cities.
thing. They're a lot of people find their work in Cardiff, because that's where the jobs are. See, those morning trains back and forth Cardiff are packed because as you say, they not always. You have some people who work in Ponty still and stuff, but a lot of people work in Cardiff, and if they're not, and then you've got sort of other issues. So if you see like Rhondda Valley, sort of Mardy, that sort of smaller valley next to Rhondda Valley, that doesn't really have train links at all.
I mean, there's a mountain, just for anyone who's not sure, can't see the topography. There are major hills, very steep hills along this line. This is just a totally isolated. So Mardy and Blaen Llechau are totally hidden. Kind of, there's just this little valley that it's just on its totally isolated, relying on presumably for public transport. There will be a bus, and presumably a reasonably infrequent bus service.
It's a pretty miserable situation for people who live towards sort of Mardy, Ferndale area, because like if you're trying to get to Cardiff, you're either going to catch a bus that will probably take you the best part of like 2 and a bit hours to get to Cardiff if you're working there, or you're catching a bus to like a train station like Porth or something, or somewhere a bit nearer, to then go to Cardiff. Like I knew I was working for a council call centre up in Williamstown. I think it was Williamstown. A couple of years ago. That's that's sort of a big employer as well, RCT Council. But and someone was had just started working in the same call centre as me, who had previously in a Tesco call centre in Cardiff, and he used to tell me that he would he'd finish on a late shift at the call centre and sort of be stuck to get home, because like if you miss the other thing is that like the buses and trains going back and forth the valleys in Cardiff, like they end quite early. Like the trains not horrendously bad, they'll still have ones going something past 11 at night, but buses, they stop running pretty early on,
and particularly if they're finishing early on in Cardiff or in the major, it means that they're that's it's even more useless when you're out in the sticks, when presumably they're actually finishing even earlier so they can get back to their depots, which are likely to be in the city rather than out in the fringes. Not great. So people are so there's a real challenge. And the other thing is, so I suppose it comes back to a thing that we've discussed on RailNet before. Just to
come back to Rhondda Valley as well. Probably, as you can imagine as well, sort of places like Mardy, Ferndale, if you can see that little white patch by where it says Stanley Town, it says Penrhys. That's these are some of like the most deprived areas as well in the Rhondda, and I can't help but that is part of it's just so difficult to get around. you can't get hold of, like Penrhys, you can't tell there, but it's on the top of quite a steep hill. And when it snows, people get stranded up there really easily because the snow falls quite thick. You can't drive in and out. And so there's just these compounding sort of transport issues that makes it such a complicated area for public transport, and such an area that really desperately needs better transport links. And then that's the other thing is that despite all this, there are still areas in like North West Wales and stuff, or sort of like Midwest Wales, that have even worse problems with public transport where trains are concerned. So I'm rambling a bit because it's such a big subject, but
I mean, and we could this could be a subject in and of itself, and the importance of public transport. It comes back to the thing we chatted about in RailNet, the point I was going to make. And yes, to those in the chat, I am going to put up Rail Map online to show you what the rail network used to look like. I'm going to do that shortly. But this, it comes back to the thing which is, yes, public transport is not the preserve of the wealthy. People, particularly in the demographic of the valleys, very much maps onto people who do not have. A lot of people do not have access to any cars, let alone just one car per household. People do not by default have a car in these regions, so they rely on public transport to get around. And given the distances involved, and the fact that what people who are driving means that the traffic is dreadful, you can't upgrade the roads, and kind of where it has, it's hugely disruptive, and generally it's to bypass these areas, not serve them. Traffic is dreadful, which means the buses are not viable where you've got. So you need to have rail connections because those can at least be uninterrupted and get you places more quickly.
Yeah, that's what I meant by that sort of like weird sort of phrase where I said everything feels further away, because I don't think stuff is that far away, but it's because, like, obviously I can't drive and I can't cycle either because I'm like kinetically challenged. All I can do is walk and sit on a train. And if you're one of them, a lot of people are like that in the valleys, which means that, like, getting anywhere is such a project, that everything you do end up feeling a little bit more isolated because everything is such a faff sometimes just to get just to go to town to shopping and stuff. It's not ideal.
Absolutely. So if I drag this over to here, so people can just answer the question. People want to know how many railways there were in this valley, and you can see there was a railway that, to be honest, that is
this from when the coal industry and stuff was? Because
exactly.
I know
So this is giving an idea. Firstly, the density of railway, and we've done this already on the South Wales Metro episode. The density of railways here is indicative of how industrial the area was, right? So if we look at both Rhondda Valley, which is this one, it had a railway running right up the valley, and Rhondda Valley. You can see the railway there. You can see all the feeder railways. So actually, much of the railway still exists. If I switch off this and this, and switch off, put on modern railways, and then switch this off, you can see how many are left. Not as many.
That's wild. I didn't know this website existed.
You'll waste hours on it. It's dangerous. But that gives you an idea of how much the railways. But to be honest, most of these were not passenger railways to start with. They were
they're
coal railways. They were not for passengers. So it's a little. Yes, it would be nice if. Sorry, go on.
They would have been to transport. I was talking about getting rid of the coal waste. They would have been to transport stuff to transport both coal and to transport stuff for dumping into
where there were spoil heaps. Absolutely. Also, if people want to know what an extractive railway system looks like, this is it. This is a railway not designed for people. This is a railway designed to take minerals
that's the other thing, is that
away from another territory for the benefit of someone else. But anyway, that's by the by. So let's just return to the slides. So we've kind of talked a bit about that. Hopefully that's useful for wait a minute. Someone said turn on the industrial lines. Okay, well, there's an industry. Oh golly, yeah, there you go.
There's
good grief.
Yeah, there we go. You'll
Absolute
see
chaos.
That's where they go up to the hills.
Yeah. So these are all the ones feeding up into the mines and onto spoil heaps and so on and so forth. So I think we've talked a lot about the current system and why public transport is important. I mean, we could discuss that for hours and hours because it's. But hopefully we've made the point of why it's so important. For anyone wondering why Becca's head keeps resizing, it's because we did a weird Skype call that I've never done before, and it seems that based on the internet, it's changing the resolution, and rather than just holding the resolution, OBS is just shrinking and resizing Becca's head based on how many pixels I'm being sent. So I'm not going to change it every 5 minutes. It's fine.
Nice, because basically what happened is that I had never used Skype before and I couldn't figure out how to do the call in the normal way.
I use old-fashioned Skype from 20 years ago because it works best with OBS because I'm a curmudgeonly git, and it's because I haven't worked out how to get like Zoom to work with it properly yet. Anyway, that's for another time. No one cares. So no one cares about how unprofessional and bad a job I do of this thing that I have done every week now for 2 years. So the Rhondda Valley line. Let's talk about the railway. So you've talked a bit about how poor the service is and why, but I don't know if you wanted to explore that a bit. If there's anything more you wanted to say about that experience, and particularly not just your experience, but what your perception of that experience is for others and how it impacts on people in the valleys. If you wanted to chat a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've covered it in my general sort of whinge about the temperature and it being late. But what the main gripe is, and again, anyone who's from the valleys will probably feel this as well, is that there's never enough carriages.
Yeah.
So it's always late, or for the most part, it's late, or is cancelled with almost no notice. Some of the things that I didn't send through to you, well, I found when I name searched trains on my account, was just me having sort of frustrated little interactions with the Reef Trains Wales, and sort of being told 40 minutes into the thing that the train wasn't coming. Anyway, so it's always late or delayed, cancelled, and when it gets there, you usually get one carriage, two carriage for a huge amount of people trying to commute into the city. Now, I'm saying this, I don't know quite what it's been like during commuting hours the past couple of years. I'm going from when I used to commute. What I do know from going back and forth the valleys to visit my mother and stuff in recent years is that for whatever reason, when the train schedule got reduced during COVID, when demand kind of dropped, and they it was that sort of, we were just in because of COVID. It took a long time for services to get anywhere close to what they were.
Yeah. So
you'd have like one service an hour during like the week, or like on a Saturday, between the valleys and Cardiff, which is usually there's two, so it's like half the service, and stuff like that. And you'll go there like, I think once maybe when I've been going home to visit my mother in the past couple of months, that there hasn't been like a delay or a cancellation. The other week I went back and it was sort of like one train got cancelled after another, and you're standing there sort of like fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, this is worse.
It makes it a stressful experience.
Yeah. It's worth saying, like, just for an idea of scale. I hadn't really done this. I forgot to mention this, but for people who want an idea of scale, the Rhondda Valleys alone have a population of between 70 and 100,000, depending on how you add it up. Like, it's a big area. That's a huge population. That's a huge number of people being served by this railway line, and the service is. It can be described as I mean, we're going to reasonably briefly get into the issues of why this is. In fact, probably in about 20 seconds. But it's a similar story to what the actual rural line that I travel on to get to my parents is similarly shonky. And it comes down to lots of the similar problems. And I think, maybe I'll explore some of these, and you might be aware of some of these, you might not be aware of them. The first one, and there are loads of people in the chat describing some of the challenges actually. So hello to all the people in the chat. Apologies about Becca's internet, by the way. Becca has very good reasons. We're all sending our best wishes to Becca's family at the moment because they've got the Rona. And as a result, you're relying on your shoddy internet rather than you're going to be relying on.
Oh, we're getting internet complaints. I'm sorry, everyone.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm sitting on the floor next to my router just to say, like,
it's not your. Britain is a failed state, which means that you can't. For some reason you can't have good internet despite you being right next to your router. It's fine. It's not your fault. So the main one that a lot of people are talking about is the fact that until very recently, until TFW became a thing and they took it over, the franchises that ran railways in Wales were not allowed to grow the service. They weren't allowed to lease more trains. They were banned, literally, like their contract did not allow them to hire more trains. So, despite the fact that these services were growing, and in fact they were buying new line, they were constructing new lines, in fact, to run more trains, they were limited by contract on how many trains they could run on the whole network. So it was a not for growth. The idea of letting out a not for growth franchise is absolutely baffling, but that's kind of probably problem one. And that's the DfT. That's Westminster. That's central government deciding that that's a good idea. So problem one is Westminster government causing headaches, particularly for the valleys, where you had this incredible growth, this desire of people to travel. Not just that, but socioeconomic policy of Westminster and Cardiff was to grow, to create these hubs of employment, often requiring you to travel on public transport, either in Newport or in Cardiff, or kind of in between, like LG or some of these big employers, the automotive industry or whoever it happened to be. These employers were not in the valleys; they were down in the flat areas where you could build a multi-100-acre site or whatever it is, Amazon warehouse or whatever it happened to be. So to get people to those required public transport, and yet they had no intent. They had no desire to allow Arriva Trains Wales to run more trains. So that, first of all, is a major cause of issues. Also, the fact that they were running these things that you've already talked about, these Class 150s. We talked in the second episode, I think, of Rail Natter. We did the history of diesel multiple units in the UK, or in GB rather, and these are very old. They are very old trains. These things
How old are they? Tell me.
Oh, early 80s. Which, maybe it doesn't sound that old, but that is old for a train. They're as old as Pacers, These trains are as old as, and in some cases as knackered as Pacers, of which are still running in Wales, by the way. For anyone who's like, we finally got rid of the Pacers. No, still running Pacers here and there, just not on this line. I think it's just 150s on this line, for the nerds who know what that means. So here they are. It's an old diesel unit. Diesels are inherently shaky and unreliable compared to electric trains. The Valleys line should have been electrified 30, 40, 50 years ago, let alone the fact that it's only just happening now, and not even fully. It's still only kind of a partial bodge job, but at least it's happening. But we'll get to the future. For now, we're moaning about why this is a problem and has been a problem in the past. So you've got these unreliable trains that we're not allowed to run any more of, and also it's on a line that is, for quite substantial lengths of its length, is single track. So if you have like some problem or a train is delayed, it means that they can't pass each other, so they have to sit there doing nothing in the platform, or indeed, not reaching a platform, waiting for the other train to arrive from the other direction, which means everything gets screwy. Also, they rely, this line meets, as we looked at on the map. In fact, bring it back up for us. You look on the map. If I just bring up the transport map here, you look on the map, you can see that it's a fractal. So you've got the kind of the Rhondda Line connects up to the main kind of Taff Vale line, which in turn then is working its way into Cardiff and getting snarled up in all the kind of the Cardiffy stuff, working its way down and kind of. So all the ripple effects, you get delays at Cardiff Central, they ripple back up the line. You get delays at Queen Street, they ripple back up the line. So if you've got an issue on one of these lines, it often ripples out onto all of the other valleys lines. So, and given that you're running unreliable trains with lots of single track bits that are, and also with to get nerdy, with signalling systems that are often not particularly robust, you can see where immediately you've just got a system that's not fit for purpose to transport lots and lots of people around. So I think those are the key issues. I don't know. Does that match with describing that? Do those match with your experiences of like unreliable trains and waiting for trains that seem to be disappeared off the map?
Absolutely, the single track thing I've noticed from my travels as well, because it'll split into two for certain stations and then sort of join back up. And I have quite often thought, even when I've been sort of like sat in a train with it not moving, thinking like, how are they going to still run things? Because I'm on the train, it's not moving, it's stuck between stations and there's just one track. So that completely. And also the signaling thing, because that's all the time it was like, there's been a signaling failure at so and so, and it's all completely makes sense.
I mean, these lines have been run on a shoestring for a very long time. And And so, signal failures often refer to like the points where tracks split. Often they can just get gummed up, or they can just fail, or the motor burns out. Also, the actual signals themselves can go pop. All sorts of issues. I don't actually know how up to date the signaling system is on these, but it's getting updated or significantly updated as part of the future work. So that's good. But there's a mixed. I'd imagine there's just a mixed bag, and a lot of it will be, if it's like any British kind of suburban lines, which let's just out and out say it, like probably the element of rail that Britain is absolutely worst at is not rural railways, because actually generally our rural services hold up pretty well. It's not intercity services, because they're actually pretty good, even though they can be quite crowded. They run pretty frequently. They're fast. It's the suburban networks that Britain's railways are just dreadful at. The ones that most people use, the ones that are the most important to the most people, are the ones we are singularly dreadful at. And it's because we've got this attitude that if you're in suburbia, you should be driving. That's still the policy aim of government, is that's the approach. It's not that people travel by train. Certainly in Westminster, less so in the devolved administrations, but certainly when it comes to Wales, we'll talk about this in a minute. Power is not something that they have. So those are some of the issues on the line, and I think you agree that they seem to kind of match up. But I want to instill some optimism. I'm conscious of time. I want to instill some optimism, hopefully. Which is, what about the future? And will the South Wales Metro fix things? Will they make your commute or your journey to see family any better, any less miserable? And the answer is possibly, but I want you to answer it. What I'm going to do is sort of say some of the things that are going to change, and see if these seem like they are providing you hope. Alex, I know you're watching. This is for you. I said that it wasn't going to all be doom and gloom. Alex Fortune watching. I'm not going to say what he does, but people who know him know him. Also, if people want to know what the South Wales Metro is, go back to when James Bennett from TFW joined us and told us all about the South Wales Metro pretty much exactly a year ago. So go and do that. That was episode 44. Crikey. So here is a map of the South Wales Metro as it will sort of be. And here we are. We're up at... there's Dinas Rhondda. There's Porth. There we are. There's Porth. You said Porth was where you hop on and off. Right? There we are.
It's my turf.
That's it. It's the crib. So yeah, this is this line here. We are up to Treherbert and Ynyswen and so on and so on and so on. Lovely. I love that there's so many euphemism names. Like Pentref is village, right? That means village. It's like these places aren't. They're huge. It's funny. Anyway.
I believe Porth is gate. Means gate.
Yeah. Lovely. So it's I'm trying to remember why is that? Why is Porth called Gate? Is there a gate?
It's because it's the first town as you get into
into the valley.
Valleys. Yeah, it's like the first valleys town. Because Trehavard, like, you're still not like properly in the valleys yet. You're still closer to Pontypridd, which is sort of towards Taff End. Yeah.
There you go. So here's the map showing. So as you'd expect, the Rhondda Valley line is on the map. It's on the map for the metro. But what does that actually practically mean? I've nabbed these straight off the website. So these are the TFW claims as of an hour and a half ago. Which is, so currently I think there is. And this might not be right in COVID. It might still be like hourly, but in theory there should be 2 trains an hour in each direction, right?
I think they might have just gone back to 2 trains an hour.
Okay.
But for a long time it wasn't, and I'm not sure if it might have gone back down, because I know they said that they were having staffing issues to do with COVID. So I'm not sure if their schedule has been reduced. I should have checked. Sorry.
That's it. No, that's a problem right across the whole of the rail network. Like half of most services out of London, Victoria don't exist anymore because of the number of staff that have been off with COVID. Crazy. So this first bullet point is that your service theoretically will double in each direction, which is nice, right? That's good.
That would be incredible. If you were still commuting, that would mean a lot, because usually, like, you miss your train to work in the morning, you're automatically late for work, you're in trouble, and
and it's like 4 trains is still not. It's not quite reaching Metro. Again, I get angry about people misusing Metro. Metro should be used for high density services. This isn't Metro yet, even though it's called Metro. It's called itself Metro. It isn't actually Metro because it's not high enough. But a train every quarter of an hour does mean that you can start turning up at stations without worrying too much about when the next train's going to be. It's starting to reach the point of like, oh, I've just missed that one, but it's not an hour or half an hour. It's like quarter of an hour. It's kind of a tolerable wait to the next train. It's not perfect, but it's getting there, right?
Yeah, it's a lot better than what it is, and you also. It will help people sort of schedule their day better, because sometimes if you've got like if you're going somewhere at a certain time, your options are like be late somewhere or be too early and be waiting out in the cold or something. So yeah, that's good. It's good stuff.
So that's good. And then and there's the logic is that this is your ones that you'll I don't know how useful this will be for most people, but they are going to extend from Cardiff down to Cardiff Bay. So if you want to go shopping,
It's useful for me because I live in Cardiff Bay.
Oh really? Well, there you go. That is actually there we go. That's useful. So only 2 out of 4.
If you're not familiar with how sort of Cardiff Bay is, there used to be like a shuttle type train service between Cardiff Queen Street, which is one of the main ones in town, and Cardiff Bay every 10 minutes. But since COVID, that's pretty much gone. I think now it's like 1 an hour.
So for anyone not from so like Cardiff's a great city, by the way. For anyone who's not been to Cardiff's an awesome city. It's just really interesting. Lots of cool history, lots of like dark history as well, as with any kind of major port town in Britain, but very cool. Lots of bits that I really love. The centre of Cardiff is doing really kind of pretty well, I think, at the moment. Lots of interesting rejuvenation, lots of slightly more dubious rejuvenation, but, again, Britain. I love Cardiff. I've spent a lot of time in Cardiff because I've got family in Cardiff. But you go through Butte Town, like all the kind of post-industrial area, there's like a big kind of avenue that goes down, and alongside that is the little railway. And it used to have an old like class 101 or 100 bubble car, as they called it, this funny little chuffing thing that now is on the Wensleydale Railway, because I've travelled in it on the Wensleydale Railway. This little chuffy thing that used to go down to Cardiff Bay. Cardiff Bay being where Torchwood are based. If anyone actually know, they blew it up, didn't they? It blew up. The Cardiff Bay Torchwood base blew up. Anyway, for Doctor Who fans, there's the big, nice, like brassy, sort of metally Welsh sort of all the big Welsh buildings.
The Millennium Centre. I used to work in there when I worked at the opera, the aforementioned opera.
Millennium Centre's nice. There's loads of cool stuff down at the bay. Like there's nice old buildings and then kind of quite a few new buildings. It's all interesting stuff. And yeah, so it's kind of a useful connection. Lots of, as highlighted, lots of accommodation down there. Lots of residential areas in kind of the old industrial areas. So lots of growth still happening down there. So that is a useful connection. I think that seems like a sensible thing. And in theory, there'll be a new station. It's a class 121 bubble car. Thanks, Simon, you big nerd. So that's useful. And then extra. So we don't worry about that too much. That's not relevant to you. And then extra services kind of happening up to Shrewsbury. So that's kind of again fine. And Chepstow stuff. Okay, these are less valleys related. So really these are the two key ones, which is the connection to Cardiff Bay and doubling the service.
I think they're also planning to add more on the Sundays, because what it used to be on Sundays was like one train every 2 hours. Yeah. I think they might have gone up.
Yeah, I didn't put the Sunday bit in here actually, but yeah, the Sunday service is improving to like I think is it 2 an hour? Alex,
at 2 an hour, which is like incredible for a Sunday.
Yeah, which is really good. The service increase means that Pontypridd to Cardiff will become 12 trains an hour, which is getting to metro service frequencies. So the idea is that, obviously as you get close to the denser parts, then the frequency will improve. But it's not just the service. You are finally going to be getting new trains, which is nice. Mm-hmm. So there's 800 million quid, the best part of £1 billion on new trains, which is nice, of which quite a chunk will be on these things, these sort of, they're kind of tram train hybridy things. And I believe these are the ones that will be running up to Treherbert. Again, people can correct me in the chat, but I believe this is what your train will start looking like. And hopefully there'll be, I think within one of these you've got more seats than are currently in the 2-car diesel thing. And hopefully they'll be coupling up, double them. So you have 6-car trains rather than 2-car trains. Again, can be corrected on that. But that will be... it's a believe it when you'll see it type situation, but that's the theory. Say, yeah. So that should be nice. They look very snazzy. They're a bit of a weird compromise, so that they can do like on street running if the metro kind of gets extended onto street running in places. Anyway, fine. But that'll be the train. So that's nice, new trains. But all of that, so doubling the frequency is great, definitely. But do you think, is that going to solve the problems, or do you think there are some deeper outstanding issues that are still to be resolved? What are your perceptions? For example, you don't necessarily just want to get into Cardiff.
Yeah, I think that's the other problem, is sort of interconnectivity between parts of the valleys, and then again you've got the continuing issues with Rhondda Valley. You know, I don't think that they are doing any plans to extend rail lines.
Yeah, there's nothing I've seen about going up
that's
there
part
yet.
of it, and it's sort of traveling in between the valleys, you know, to get from. I mean, I'm aware there's, you know, mountains in between people, but like to get from one valley to the other, usually you're catching a train to Pontypridd, and then you're switching over, and then catching a train all the way to the other end, and they're not actually that far away from each other, but you're kind of going. So that's an issue as well, and I know that part of. I mean, it's difficult to say because the metro is obviously like a very South Wales project, which is good, because obviously it's needed. But there's also that sort of thing of like getting north to south isn't particularly easy. Getting east to west and so forth. So the interconnectivity between regions of Wales is still an issue, and is still something that people will be looking to solve. And I think that partly comes into the politics around HS2 as well. I'm sure you've heard about that. But I mean, I think my main thing is, and this is going to sound really sort of like silly, is all of this sounds very good, but I will believe it when I see it, and I remain skeptical of things sort of being on time, things actually materializing, because the rail lines have been the way they are since I can remember, and so there's this, you know, for services now would be amazing. A train like that would be amazing, but there's a bit of me that like doesn't quite trust it to actually materialize, because it's just been so long.
Well, this is
that we've had service at this standard.
Yeah, we've internalized, and this is across Britain. We've internalized the idea of upgrades, because we're so used to upgrades being delayed or failing. We're so used to it that we have totally internalized the idea that that positive transformation of rail services isn't going to happen. But right, I am going to try and instill some limited optimism by bringing up this map thing here. Now, this map thing here. Theoretically, thanks to you know who you are who sent this to me. This is from the start of 2019, so I don't know those who are on here who know who you are. Feel free to cut in if this has changed. In theory, the works to upgrade up to Treherbert will be complete by, in theory, like the end of this year. That's the theory. So okay. I mean, if that. People correct me if this is wrong, and this is just this is other stuff, and there's like different things are at play here, and actually there's more work that's going to be happening later. But my understanding is that this is supposed to be happening quite like soon, super soon. Who's going to be cutting in and supporting? This is supposed to be happening like certainly the first half of this decade. Longer term, like before the end of of this decade, theoretically there are going to be potential connections across valleys as well, which would be nice. But I'll definitely believe that when I see it. But certainly the connections down. I mean, given that lots of hundreds of millions of pounds have just been spent on a head of the valleys road that should never have been built. It just absolutely should never have been built. It's ridiculous that it was built. It should have. Yeah,
and it was built using the Welsh government's definitely not PFI. Mutual investment model funding system. That's definitely not PFI, but they can't tell us really how and why it's not PFI. But that's another bugbear that I have.
Well, that's just classic. They that should have been it should have been a railway line. Like it should have been a railway line connecting. Then people would have used the railway line instead of choosing to drive. Anyway, it's very frustrating. So that's the theory. And there's other theoretically there'll be other bits of work like extra bits of double track being built. So that'll help reliability. Yes. Which would be nice. Bits of it like
toilets in some train stations as well, which is incredible.
Yeah, so there's a bit of controversy with toilets, apparently. But there's the fact they're not going to have toilets on a lot of the trains, which I have mixed
Oh, are they
feelings.
not? Oh,
No,
okay, yeah.
no. So there's some controversy with this, but the idea is that basically you can hop off, go to the toilet in all the new toilets they're going to be building in the stations, and then hop back on, which I can kind of understand because toilets take up a lot of space on trains, they make them heavier and blah blah blah. But also that is obviously a bit of a hit to people who perceive having toilets on trains. And the other idea is that the journey time is going to be improved quite substantially. So they're going to be bringing the longest journey time down from like whatever it is now, like some
It's like,
amount
yeah,
over an
it's
hour,
like,
down to quite a
yeah,
lot less than an hour. I think down to
something
50
I
minutes.
saw that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So so that theoretically is the justification for that, which I think I can understand. It's a similar argument that Crossrail has had. Like people are saying, oh, but Crossrail trains and Thameslink trains are such a long journey. Why is there should be toilets? Like, yes, I can understand that, but the number of people doing end-to-end journeys, whereas actually a lot of people do end-to-end journeys on this one, so mixed feelings. The other thing though is that they are leaving sizable sections of railway, at least for the medium term, without electrification, which does introduce a reliability issue and makes the trains heavier because they have to carry batteries. So
I know. I saw that Post isn't one of the ones that's getting. What was it? Oh, that's what it was. What's PES? That's where I was going to ask you actually. What's PES?
Oh God, where is PES?
It makes no sense.
Where am I? Where are we?
If you look at the key.
Oh yeah.
It says existing station electrified.
Oh yeah, non-electrified PES. Oh gosh, what is? In the chat, stupid. PES. Tell me what PES is. Yes.
It's PES, whatever that
electrified,
means.
Non-electrified, PES. I don't know whether it's like, it could be like a fixed thing over the top. It might be like a fixed bracket thing rather than conventional electrification. I don't know why they needed to write that down because frankly it's extraneous detail. So pass on that one. I'm supposed to have the techie nerd answers. No, the chat are coming. The chat are going to portable electrical storage. Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's a guess from Dave. Don't anyone hold Dave to that. Thanks, Dave. Anyway, right, fine. I have mixed feelings, but understand that it allows them to accelerate the process, and it might be then that they can permanently earthed section. That means that it's wired, but it doesn't have any juice in it. Weirdly, okay. So fine. I think the logic is that it means that eventually they might then, as more people use it, they'll justify being able to then make the later investment. Fine, if that's the justification, but it shouldn't be the long-term solution. But anyway, I digress. Right, we're already over time. I'm so sorry, Becca. This always happens.
No, that's that. I'm totally fine.
So, so we're going to end on a discussion which we kind of alluded to earlier and which you touched on briefly a minute ago, which I think. Actually, we're going to cover a bit more than I've hinted on here. So it's not just Cardiff versus Westminster, but I think it's worth touching on the broader political situation in Wales in terms of North versus South and the regions versus Cardiff. It's all the same talking points that you'll see in Scotland with the Central Belt versus the rest of Scotland. And indeed London versus the rest of the UK. These are such common themes, and there are parallels between these, which is, the perceived area of greatest economic activity invariably gets the investment. So yeah, but I thought let's kind of generally talk about the Cardiff versus Westminster thing first and see where it takes us. But we don't have to talk for hours and hours on this. Just a fairly brief summary. But Cardiff versus Westminster. So what is the dynamic? What are the challenges? Why is this such a hot talking point at the moment and increasingly so?
I think, and this is something that's been fairly accelerated by the pandemic, I think, but basically. This sort of growing frustration with the constitutional settlement that we've got in Wales, the devolution settlement. Obviously, for people who don't know, the devolution settlement that say like Northern Ireland and Scotland and Wales have, they aren't all the same. The powers that each government of each respective country differs. So, for example, in Scotland, you've got control over your policing and your justice systems. You've got, you can make policy decisions. I'm thinking of recently the sort of decision or the plan to sort of not prosecute some people who are found in possession of illegal substances in Scotland. They're able to make those kinds of decisions because they've got control over that part of legislation. We don't have those same powers in Wales. We're trying to pursue, and the reason I bring up devolution of justice is because that's one of the huge tussles between Westminster and Cardiff Bay at the moment is that we want control over our police and our justice system. Notionally, the Welsh Government wants to pursue a more progressive criminal justice system that's sort of focused more on sort of rehabilitation, etc. Whether I've got my own opinions on the degree to which that is true, but that's a discussion for another time. And then other parts of it is we've got a very weird settlement to do with our transport. So as far as I understand it, we have control over the actual units, the carriages that travel on our railways, but outside of the valleys, we don't have control over our rail tracks. So I think what they call the core valley lines, which is, you know, what we've just discussed with the Rhondda and places like Rhymney and stuff, we took those into ownership during the pandemic, but the rest of it's a very strange sort of mixed-matched kind of situation. And also because of the fact that part of or much of our railway system is controlled from Westminster, means that we missed out on huge amounts of funding, which is, again, as you were talking about, you know, why things have been run on a shoestring for so long. Yeah. At the same time, we've got growing, I'm trying to sum this up as best as I can, sorry.
No, it's perfect.
And we've got sort of growing, what's the word? Growing sort of murmurings to do with independence within the Welsh Labour Party.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's happened since devolution is there's been sort of this growing trend among the Welsh public towards sort of greater devolution of powers. And particularly, as I said, this accelerated during the pandemic, because what's happened is we've suddenly become more aware of the powers that the Cardiff Bay does hold, because of the different restrictions and stuff to do with COVID that we've been able to see. Suddenly people are aware of, you know, oh, we can do things differently to England. And there's that sort of like version and sense of, it's not to be like cliche about it, but it's that taking back control type thing.
Yeah.
So we've seen sort of like quite, not surprising, but quite significant rises in support for
so pro-independent sentiment is perhaps a way to put it. Yeah,
and I know with the election that's just happened, Plaid Cymru didn't do very well. Plaid Cymru is our left-wing party and also the party of Welsh nationalism, support for independence. And they did quite badly, and that's been taken as sort of like, oh, that means that the independence question is off the table. But a significant proportion of Welsh Labour voters are supporters of independence, and you've got these sort of groups within the party that are pushing for that. And in order to appease parts of the party that are pushing for that, and to appease the wider question of sort of independence, the Welsh Government has put together this, what they call a constitutional commission, which is looking at how we can make our devolution settlement better. And that's going on sort of through this year. So at the same time, you've got this constitutional commission, you've got the pursuit of the devolution of justice. At the same time, you've also got the coal tips issue, which I alluded to earlier, which basically you've got hundreds and hundreds of high-risk coal tips across the country, but largely in the South Wales valleys. There's 75 high-risk ones in Rhondda alone. You had a collapse of a tip in Rhondda Valley in Tylerstown after Storm Dennis in 2020, just before the pandemic, which has put everyone sort of on edge because there's the lingering memory of the Aberfan disaster.
Absolutely. There's
tips in the Rhondda valleys. There's a tip saying like a strud that is above a school that has known sort of issues. I can't definitively say the degree of risk there, but it has issues that have been recorded before. And so there's this ongoing push and pull between Westminster and Cardiff Bay over who should fund the repair works that would make the coal tips safe. And that is to do with, you know, the argument being, you know, the coal industry predates devolution. We only got devolution in the late 90s. And so Westminster should take responsibility for that, but they're sort of completely vetoing add-on fence. So there's these sort of wider issues to do with this feeling of like being left out, not having control, the constitutional questions, the continuing sort of lack of funds has all fed into this HS2 thing, because the wider narrative around HS2 in Wales, and this is implied Cymru and
Labour actually,
Labour as well, is that HS2 doesn't at all cross the border into Wales. It doesn't have any direct benefits. Any benefits that it has are sort of marginal, and therefore we should get more funding and we should have control over our own transport network. Now, I'm not sure on the specifics of the first part of that. Obviously, I definitely agree with the second part because it just makes sense and we've got a really weird constitutional settlement. But that's how the politics feeds it. That's where it sort of fits into this wider context, because there's so many pushes and pulls between Westminster and Wales at the moment. You've got Westminster also continually legislating in devolved areas as well, which means that,
And there's this increase, so that there. Firstly, the interesting thing is how much we've talked about parallels between Scotland and Wales, but that the party dynamic is fundamentally different in relation to the power of Labour in Wales versus Scotland. Labour have absolutely no kind of national presence or Westminster presence in Scotland anymore. They've been decimated. And they are staunchly pro-union. Labour is staunchly pro-union in Scotland. Labour can be at best described as agnostic towards the union in Wales, and they are.
Their official position is radical federalism, as far as I know.
That's it. Yeah. Which is another way of saying rip up how things are now and make major change.
Yeah, that's definitely
which is kind of sorry what independence is. And they are doing much better. They are a force to be reckoned with in Wales. They're currently in charge. So
they've never not been in charge, to be fair.
So there's a fundamental difference in power, which is very interesting. Which possibly changes the interaction between Westminster, between the two nations. But fundamentally, we currently have a government that hates devolution. They hate devolution in England. They've been stripping powers from devolved kind of organisations in, for example, Transport for the North. They've just had their powers stripped. They have just sort of gobbled up Midlands Connect autonomy. They're giving them extra powers.
I'm so sorry. I think my internet went.
That's all right. I've still got you. You're still there.
Right. Okay.
So there are these challenges. Your head's changing size, but it's fine. We've still got you here. This government hates devolution, and they are, So there's this thing, for those who don't know, there's this thing called the Barnett formula, which defines how much, when money is spent in England, how much that then is spent, or in other parts of the UK, how much money is then spent in Northern Ireland and Wales, and it's highly politicised. Like it relies on inputs that are defined and controlled by Westminster. We'll get into this next week, as I'm about to tease later in the episode tease, because we're talking about this next week even more. I wanted to talk to you about this while we had you on, which is why I've stolen more of your evening to talk about it, because it's really good, important to get the political context. But fundamentally, Barnett, what you get is that the money that the Barnett formula kicks to the regions is called a consequential, and the HS2s, because of the government's weird and wacky modelling, HS2 there is no HS2 consequential going to Wales. There's no consequential as a result of HS2 going to Wales, and that has created this discussion, and it's highlighted the extent to which Barnett is politicised. The Barnett formula is just a tool for Westminster to decide who it's going to reward for being a good boy or girl. And this government hates devolution, and this is really brilliant, because it means it's good in a way, because it's drumming up a hell of a lot of extra support for independence, and certainly for vigorous, for radical.
It's they keep doing shit like their position is like muscular unionism is the Westminster position at the moment. You had this sort of like stupid incident where they wanted to, they've got a government building in the centre of Cardiff, and they wanted to put a giant Union Jack on the building to sort of like mark their territory kind of thing, and you keep getting all these like, because there's sort of murmurings and slight increases in people favouring independence, they're sort of trying to clamp the boot down. But obviously, the more that they do that, the more attention to the issue it brings, and the more sort of it's not how it works. It's not going to work.
The tie to your grip, Lord Tarkin, the more systems will slip through your fingers, or something like that, isn't it? If anyone wants to know, the imperial evil empire here is Westminster and English nationalism. In transport, you had the Union Connectivity Review, which have a lot of time for its main author. I think he is a positive force for railways and public transport in the UK, but it was a nakedly pro-union document intended to sort of potentially take power away, power that is the little power that Wales already has. It's potentially to take some of that away. A good example being by making the M4 corridor a strategic route, they're potentially going to just bulldoze over, literally, Wales's decision not to progress with the new M4 bypass sort of thing around Newport. There's potentially just going to bulldoze that. So this is not, in a way, not good, but in another way, this government's time is limited, and they are just strengthening the need for much stronger devolution. We'll talk more about this, but I'm glad we've had you to sort of summarise the sort of state of play from what I would do a very bad job of summarising the state of play. So I'm very glad that you have done so, and next week I'll refer people back to this segment so they can sort of soak it in. It's messy, and I suppose the most frustrating thing is that you end up with people making stuff up to make their point, which then basically undermines a point that they're making, which is fundamentally that Wales needs more power and more funding, or ideally more power over its own funding. It absolutely vigorously needs that. So I'm hitting my PC because it's rattling. It's a new PC, but I've got a load of hard drives in it that aren't screwed down, and they do have a habit of rattling. Sorry, everyone.
Such a high-tech operation. It's
just like you'd expect things to. It's like the play that went wrong. There's like bits of sparks flying down, and sort of the lighting. Literally, a lighting rig has just fallen backwards here. That's supposed to illuminate my face better because the blue tack's melted. I'm a permanent way engineer, not a media specialist. That's all I'm saying. So it's basically, it is messy, and it is going to get more. The battle is going to only get more bitter as this government gets more desperate, as it sees that it's ceding power to the devolved. Ceding power, if not legislatively, then ceding power as in it's the electorate is moving further and further against Westminster.
If you keep an eye out during this year, because again, as I say, you've got the Constitutional Commission, which is ongoing, which they sort of, I don't know how likely it is that they'll reach this conclusion, but they've said that independence isn't off the table with our Constitutional Commission. So theoretically, and again, nobody come after me because I don't know how much I believe this is the case either, but theoretically that commission could come out with at the end, we should go for independence, because there was a Commission on Justice in Wales a while back that came with a conclusion justice should be devolved, and that's the position the Welsh government then took. So theoretically, that could feasibly become the Welsh government's position. Again, not saying that that's likely. At the same time, this summer they're doing this whole program of visualizing a devolved justice system in Wales. They're basically doing things to kind of, I don't want to say posture because that sounds, but stuff is being done that is kind of pushing Westminster into trying to work with us, into ceding some more power. So I don't think this push and pull is going to get any less tense over the coming year.
And for those, there are a couple of people saying, I'm sensing a bit of anti-English sentiment here. It's like, no. If you want a perfect example that undermines any idea that this is us being anti-English, we're talking about Treasury here. We say Westminster. Reality is we mean Treasury. We mean the Cabinet Office and Treasury. If you want an example of devolution being ripped up in England, you have Transport for the North. But I'd say if you want even the most the perfect and most poignant example is the power being stripped away from the Mayor of London and Transport for London. This government hates devolution everywhere. It hates devolution in England. It does not like democratisation of power to the regions, those regions including London. This is not.
And in the Welsh context, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but whenever the English government, the Westminster government, legislates in areas that that can either have an impact on devolved matters or are directly in, sort of legislating within those devolved matters, there has to be something called a legislative consent memorandum. And I think, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but there's been more legislative consent memoranda in the past 2 years, I believe, than basically at any time. Things like the policing bill, even there's bits in there that sort of provides direct instructions to like local authorities, which is a devolved matter in Wales. There's bits in the National Anti-Border Bill that sort of mess with the Welsh position as a nation of sanctuary, stuff to do with like social services and things like that. It's a continuing thing, and the thing is, once they legislate in a devolved area, it means that it becomes difficult for you to then do your own legislation in future in that area.
Yeah.
I'm becoming less articulate now because I'm quite hungry.
No,
but
me too. My belly's trouble as well. Don't worry, we are wrapping up very soon.
No, that was it. That was just me apologising for me sort of like trailing off and sounding kind of dumb. But what I'm kind of trying to get at, it's nothing to do with being anti-English. It's the fact that there are real tangible transgressions of government's power, observable and recorded, that I'm making reference to. It's not just general. Obviously I'm not a conservative person myself, but I'm also not a big fan of the Welsh government either.
Yeah,
anyone who's read anything that I've written will know. I come from this on a position of what's ever best for the people in Wales. I'm a policy person rather than a party person at the moment. So it's coming genuinely from a position of what I can see and observe.
Exactly, and it comes down to democracy. It comes down to representation. An epiphany that I've been having increasingly over sort of the last sort of 6-7 years is local government good, local and regional government good, national government basically bad, and pan-national government also good, because anything that you need to solve at a national level probably is useless to be solved at a national level, because it probably needs to be solved at at a planet-wide or certainly a kind of a continental level, and anything that then needs to be solved at a local level is not well suited by national government either. So I'm kind of all for like increased power to regions and local authorities, and increased power to certainly powers that nations think they ought to have, then work up to kind of pan-national organisations, because things like climate change can't be solved by individual nation states, and things like making sure that you have good local buses can't be solved by nation state level government either. So for me, it's like very few problems neatly fit into being a national issue. Actually, most problems are either like planet-wide or are local. Anyway. Let's wrap up there. We've gone off on one hopelessly, and I've taken up far too much of your evening, Rebecca. I'm so sorry. So,
no,
I put in. I was going to play the video, but I'm going to play it next week. So let's go back to our miniaturized faces. I'm going to play this video next week. But basically, Mick Antonio he's Labour. Antonu, sorry, Antonu.
Mick Antonu, yeah. He's Labour, and he's traditionally been considered to be on the Labour left. But yeah, he's sort of
He's getting angry about HS2, and kind of, to be honest, mostly I agree with him. This is basically going to be the theme of next week. It's like I mostly agree with all the points being made. It's just that they're making wrong points anyway about a thing that is blah 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 blah. We've finished that conversation now, right? The traditional outro. So thanks everyone for listening. Thanks to everyone in the chat as well. You've all been wonderful. Some really interesting discussions. Yes, Alex Fortune is pointing out corrections about nationalisation of railways, but that's a whole episode in and of itself, I think. Thanks, Alex. Thanks everyone who's been watching and inputting. It's been great. You can listen to this in all the normal places. Hopefully it's worked in audio only form. Actually it has, because it's basically just been Becca and I kind of chatting at length, which is really nice. So that's that. The usual sort of ads. I have to have ads because people tell me off when I don't do this bit. Patreon.com/Gareth Dennis is where you can make more of this happen. Suggest guests. Thanks to everyone who's been suggesting guests for this year. It's really always kind of good for you all to input in, so that I know what people you want to hear from. Merchandise from Masket. Go collect merch. If you want a mask or a mug that has the logo on it, why not? Also, put in your mug suggestions for things that are funny or you want to have on a mug. PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis if you'd want to just chuck loose change at me, and GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord to continue in the chat that's been happening in the YouTube channel. In the YouTube chat, you can do more of that just in perpetuum in there. Next week is going to be, it's episode 97, which is thematically, does HS2 benefit Wales? I just thought I'd cut right to the heart of the issue. Does HS2 benefit Wales? That is going to be the episode. And this has been I think this whole episode, not just the bit at the end there, I think this whole episode has been really valuable context to the discussion. And we'll talk, I think next week I'll probably be exploring some of we didn't actually touch on it, but some of the South Wales, well, actually particularly Cardiff and Newport versus all of the rest of Wales type dynamic as well, because I think that plays into this really importantly. Yes, so that's that. What was the other thing I was going to say? Something sensible, and it's gone. Never mind. It was going to be a valid point, but it's. Oh yes, no. I'm going to go back to our while I have this episode thing up. So the live episode, which is happening in a couple of weekends, the pre-record. It's not going to be live. It's going to be a pre-record, but it will be live because there'll be actual humans there. It is going ahead, but I'm going to keep it smaller to minimise risk from COVID. So one of those standard things of being very nervous about the COVID situation, given that Omicron was climbing. I didn't think an event was a good idea, but actually we're going to do it with about 20 people there. So there's still going to be a few people there, but it'll be smaller. It'll be a trial run for another one. So there will be another pre-record at some point in the future. Maybe I'll do a double live one where it's a pre-record, but it's also not a pre-record. It's an episode being recorded live with a live audience. But good grief. I don't know how I'm going to manage that, given I've got blue tack melting and sparks flying from above my head, Rebecca. I don't know how that's going to go, but anyway, we'll see. I can just hit it with a hammer. That's what track engineers do, right? Yes. So if you've bought a ticket off Eventbrite, you'll have got an email from me. If you haven't, then go and check your spam, check your email inbox. You'll have got some information from me. Those who've booked, it is going ahead, which is good because it means that York LGBT Forum will get £250 to £300 from me, which is nice because it allows them to do more things. So I'm pleased about that. I didn't want to cancel because it would have meant that I'd have had to not give York LGBT Forum cash. That was kind of the pressure from the other side. Anyway, it is too late to get a ticket this time, Matteo. I'm sorry, but there will be more tickets for another event in the future, probably this summer. Someone suggested doing one in Cardiff, which I think would be awesome. So maybe I will do one in Cardiff. Maybe make it a touring show. Let's see. But I'll do another one in York first so that I can get the tech down. So keep your eyes out for that. For those who have bought tickets, you can come and watch. I'm looking forward to it. I'm very scared because all of a sudden it makes it a bit of a live stand-up type situation. Good God. I have no idea. Right. I waffled that bit very vigorously. Let's go back to the two of us. Rebecca, you've gone weirdly. Your resolution's increased sufficiently that you've. Anyway, it's gone back to normal size now. I don't understand Skype at all. It does seem to have worked, though. That's the main thing. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time, for giving up literally an hour and a half of your evening, and more than that, actually, because I phoned you a bit earlier. So thanks for that. It's been brilliant. Any last thoughts? Anything you want to share with them? Anything you want to plug, actually? I didn't give you a chance to plug anything. Anything you want to plug?
Oh, God, I don't have anything to... I mean, you can follow me at Wilkes-Becker on Twitter. I work for the National Wales. So that's the national.wales. I'm a reporter and occasionally I'm a columnist there when I get time. So you can follow them at National Wales, I believe it is, on Twitter. Yeah. But yeah.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. That's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed that. It's been... you were worried that you wouldn't have like sufficient levels of rail chat, but actually you've spoken for an hour and a half on railways. So there you go. That's a turn up for the books. It's happened. No, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. Thanks everyone for watching. Thank you, Rebecca. And it only really remains for us to sort of wave vigorously as is traditional for Welsh Rail Natter episodes, as the chorus sing us out. So cheerio, everyone. Cheerio.